Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Sunday, Yom Rishon. Let's light up the darkness. Okay. We're having some trouble with the old camera. So we've got a new camera, and I'm still working with it. And I think the picture looks okay. Could be better. I'm also a little concerned about the sound. So can you hear me clearly? Does it sound different than normal? Is the volume okay? The main thing, is it clear? The microphone situation is a little bit different. There's always a delay between what I say and when you actually hear me. So it'll take me a second to receive the comments back. But I want to know, does it look okay? Does it sound okay? Who's in the house? Yehud in South Carolina, Karen in Northern California, Lucy in Minnesota, Melissa in Great Neck, Joe in the Inland Empire, Lorraine in Texas, Gail in Kansas City, Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey. Renee, I really enjoyed the soundtrack to the movie. Oh, I'm so glad you liked that. Lucy, the sound is great and you look good. Baruch Hashem. Yehuda, pick and sound perfect. That's great. Awesome. Shandor in the Bronx. Guy in Ohio. Welcome. Hi, I'm in Florida. Lester in Florida. Marie in Freeport. Ella in Southern California. Elise in Virginia. Moshe in Brooklyn. Ilanit in Silver Spring. Who says good sound on YouTube. Elise says sound is good. Great. Great. I'm really happy to hear that. Okay. So then, we'll proceed. I feel like probably use a little more contrast, but whatever. That's just being picky. Okay. If the sound is good, that's the main thing. That's very good. I'm actually just using the microphone in the camera, which will actually make things quite a bit simpler. So if it sounds good, Baruch Hashem. Okay. We are on the penultimate page. I toyed with the idea of making the siyum today, but better. Okay, it'll be a short daf today and a short daf tomorrow. And tomorrow, with God's help, we'll make a siyum on tractate Zevachim and open tractate Menachos. That would be tomorrow. So our daf today is page 119, and we already did almost all of 119a. So today we're just doing 119b, and we'll even leave a little bit over because the convenient stopping point. We'll leave a little bit of 119b to go for tomorrow, but 120b is almost non-existent, so it'll still be a short daf tomorrow. We're continuing our discussion of the only Mishnah here in the final chapter of Zevachim, chapter 14, Mishnah 1. Generally speaking, that one may not offer up outside the temple or outside the national altar once it's designated, except during those brief periods when the altar was at Gilgal, right? When the Mishkan was at when the tabernacle was at Gilgal, those first 14 years after Joshua led the children of Israel into the Holy Land. Then we had the national altar, the tabernacle at Shiloh, no private altars for 369 years. And then we had another period when the Mishkan was at Nov and Givon. Private altars were permitted during that period. And after that, Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem. And then from then on and forever, no more private altars. One is not liable for offering up outside the temple if what he's bringing up couldn't have been brought up on the altar inside the temple. That's the general principle we've been working with in all kinds of permutations. All right, let's get back to it. Right at the bottom of page 119a. With regard to the words rest and inheritance, right? And as we saw, the general accepted opinion among the sages is that this is in the command when Moses said, once you shall not offer up wherever you see fit, right? Meaning private altars. Once God gives you rest and inheritance. And so the general opinion was, rest would be not during the wars of conquest when the tabernacle was at Gilgal. But once that period was over, the conquering of the Canaanite nations, and then the dividing up of the land among the tribes, then we have our rest, right? The people are at rest during that period. And then the inheritance would seem to refer to once the Holy Temple was established in Jerusalem and that the Temple Mount consecrated for all time. And because there's a division between a rest and an inheritance, that's that period of Nov and Givon in between Shiloh and Jerusalem. Okay. So with regard to the words rest and inheritance in the aforementioned verse, the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught that this and that, i.e. both of these terms, are actually a reference to Shiloh. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai says actually this and that, both rest and inheritance, refer to Jerusalem. And so the Gemara asks, granted, according to the one who says that with regard to the word rest, this is a reference to Shiloh, and with regard to inheritance, that this is a reference to Jerusalem, or the reverse, i.e. that rest is a reference to Jerusalem and inheritance a reference to Shiloh, and this is as it is written, to the rest and to the inheritance, el menucha ve'el hanachala, utilizing two different phrases. Now we're on page 119b. But according to the one, meaning the school of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that both terms refer to Shiloh, or according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, that both this and that are references to Jerusalem, well, that doesn't work because then the verse should have stated, for you have not as yet come to the rest inheritance. Not rest and inheritance, but rest inheritance. Menucha nachala. And the Gemara concedes, yes, that is difficult. And generally in the conversation that we've been having, we understand why one term would refer to Shiloh and one term would refer to Jerusalem. But how could both terms refer to Shiloh or both terms refer to Jerusalem? So the Gemara comments, and granted, according to the one, i.e. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says that both terms are references to Shiloh, each of the designations may be explained. Is this a mistake or is this a problem with the editing? Right, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai said both terms refer to Jerusalem, but okay. Let's just read what it says here according to the Quoran editors. Right, so granted, according to the one, i.e. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says that this and that are references to Shiloh, I think that should be the school of Rabbi Yishmael, each of the designations may be explained. It is called rest because during the period of Shiloh, they rested from the conquest in the time of Joshua. And it is called inheritance because they divided the portions of land among the tribes there, as it is written, and Joshua divided the land for them, and he cast a lot for them in Shiloh according to the Lord. But according to the one, i.e. the school of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that this and that are references to Jerusalem, granted that inheritance is a reference to Jerusalem since it is an eternal inheritance. But with regard to rest, what rest was there in the temple in Jerusalem, right? There was nothing temporary about the temple in Jerusalem. The temple itself ended up being temporary, but as we've learned, the Temple Mount was consecrated for all time. So what does this mean, rest? What was rest about that? They'd already been in the land for many centuries. So what does this mean? But according to the one, but with regard to the term rest, what rest was there in the temple in Jerusalem? So the Gemara answers that the rest of the ark, as it is written, and when the ark rested. In other words, the verses occasionally refer to the temple in Jerusalem not only as the place of the altar and where people bring the nation brings its sacrifices, but also the place of rest of the ark, right? The Ark of the Covenant containing the tablets of the Ten Commandments, the original Torah scroll written by Moses, the jar of the manna, that was preserved from the desert. All of that would be hidden away and would not be present in the second temple, but it was present in the first temple, Solomon's temple, so it was a place of rest for the ark. Now, the Gemara comments, granted, according to the one, i.e. Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says that this and that are references to Jerusalem. Okay, that's making more sense. And consequently, private altars were forbidden only following the establishment of the temple in Jerusalem. But during the period of the tabernacle in Shiloh, private altars were permitted. Right, so now we're getting away from what was the accepted opinion, right? These are minority opinions, either the school of Rabbi Yishmael or of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai. Okay, so the concept now is, if the nation did not achieve the full rest and inheritance until the temple was built in Jerusalem, and the Temple Mount designated for all time as the place of the national altar, well, this would square with the idea that private altars were permitted during all those years, those nearly 4 centuries, when the tabernacle resided at Shiloh. Up until now, we've been saying, no, there were no private altars during that whole period. But why would it be, let's say, convenient for there to have been private altars during the period at Shiloh? And the reason is Samson's parents. And I'm sorry about the typo. It shouldn't say, the title of today's class is not Samson's parents, it's Samson's parents, as in the famous Samson. And that's what it says here. Right? So, granted, according to this one, Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says that this and that are references to Jerusalem, and consequently private altars were forbidden only following the establishment of the temple in Jerusalem. But during the period of the tabernacle in Shiloh, private altars were permitted. This would jibe with what is written in Judges 13:19. Quote, so Manoah took the kid with the meal offering and offered them upon the rock to the Lord, i.e., he sacrificed them upon a private altar and not in Shiloh. So this is the episode, Judges 13. It begins, sadly, that the nation did what was evil in the eyes of the Lord. They were turning away from the Lord. Idolatry was creeping in. The spiritual level of the nation had dropped. And so the people were given into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. And then God said, okay, I'm going to help you out. You're my chosen people, my firstborn because it was the Jews who first recognized God as the one God of the world. That's why the Jews are called the firstborn. And sort of that made God a father into the world, right? Until then, God wasn't recognized as the one God until Abraham came along and did that. Okay, so in this period that we're talking about now, the period of the judges, when the tabernacle is in Shiloh, and God says, I'm going to send you a deliverer, somebody who's going to begin to deliver you from the hand of the Philistines, and this would be Samson. And so an angel of the Lord appears to the wife of this man Manoah and says to her, you've been barren, but you're going to have a child. And he should never have strong drink, and you should never bring a razor on his head. He would be a Nazir from birth. And then she's a little bit freaked out. She tells her husband, he comes, and the angel of the Lord speaks to them both. And they're like, is he a prophet? Is he an angel? And then he kind of like does a vanishing act, right before them. And they realize that he was an angel of the Lord and that they saw him and they lived. So evidently it was to deliver this message that they would have this son, this very important son. And in recognition and gratitude for that, the father offers upon a rock, not an altar built of rocks, but a rock. So that there we learn that for private altars, it could just be a rock. It doesn't have to be built, at least according to one opinion. But the point is that he brought an offering during the period when the altar and the Mishna and the tabernacle were in Shiloh, and he brought upon a private altar, which we've been saying not permitted during the period of Shiloh, and yet we're told in the book of Judges that it happened. But according to the one, i.e. the school of Rabbi Yishmael, who says that this and that, rest and inheritance are references to Shiloh, and private altars were forbidden during this period, what is the meaning of, so Manoah took, meaning offered his own private offering, as it was forbidden to sacrifice offerings outside the temple? And the Gemara answers, permitting this sacrifice was a provisional edict issued in exigent circumstances. This was a completely exceptional occurrence. Manoah had no precedent to follow. An angel of God just appeared to him and with a miraculous manifestation. And he said, well, we should give an offering. And God accepted that offering through the angel. But we can't learn out from that other private altars would be permitted or not permitted. This was an absolutely unique occurrence. Now, the Gemara notes that with regard to the disagreement between the Tanaim, the sages of the Mishnah, over the interpretation of the words rest and inheritance, there is another version of that which the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, which is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who says that this and that are references to Jerusalem. And your mnemonic to remember this is the man pulled the men, meaning that Rabbi Shimon ben Yochai, who is an individual, pulled, i.e. convinced the members of the school of Yishmael to adopt his opinion. And that perhaps led to the confusion at the top of this Amud, of 119b. Okay, next topic. Back to our Mishnah, the Mishnah here in chapter 14, which teaches that with regard to all offerings, that one consecrated during a period when private altars are permitted. Okay, so somebody consecrated an offering to bring it on a private altar. He designated an animal. I'm going to bring this animal on a private altar. And then that period ends, right? That's the concept. So with regard to all offerings that one consecrated when private altars are permitted, but then he sacrificed it outside their designated area when private altars are prohibited. In other words, he designated the animal to bring it on a private altar. And then, maybe like at the end of the period of Gilgal, when private altars were permitted, but then they established it at Shiloh, and it's like, okay, no more private altars. So he's got an animal. It was consecrated when private altars are permitted, and now he needs to bring it to Shiloh. And what if he doesn't? What if he goes ahead with his plan to bring it on a private altar? Now the private altars have just become prohibited, and he's got an animal that he consecrated when private altars were permitted. Right, so obviously, this is not something that's happening very often in history, but what is the law? So with regard to this situation, the Mishna said, with regard to all offerings that one consecrated when private altars are permitted, and then he sacrificed it not on the public altar once private altars were prohibited, this person is in violation of a positive mitzvah to bring it to the national altar and a prohibition not to bring it on a private altar, but he is not liable to receive kares for sacrificing them, presumably because he consecrated it when it was permitted. Now, with regard to this, Rav Kahana says they taught that only with regard to slaughter of these animals outside the designated area. So they taught that only with regard to slaughter of these animals outside the designated area is one not liable to receive kares. Remember, there's two prohibitions: to slaughter not at the national altar when private altars are prohibited, and to offer up not at the national altar when private altars are prohibited. So Rav Kahana is saying they taught that only with regard to slaughter of these animals outside the designated area is one not liable to receive kares, excision, death at the hands of the heavenly court. But with regard to offering up during this period, one would also be liable to receive kares. What is the reason for this? It is that immediately following the Torah's description of an offering that was consecrated during a period of permitted private altars, the verse states, the penalty for sacrificing outside the designated area, and to them, va'alhem, you shall say, and the term alehem, to them, the first letter of which is the letter aleph, is phonetically similar to the term alechem, about them, the first letter of which is the letter ayin, and therefore the verse can be understood to mean about that which is written in the adjacent passage, you shall say. And the preceding passage discusses offerings that were slaughtered outside the temple. So although there is no penalty of kares for their slaughter, one would be liable for kares for sacrificing them on a private altar, even though he consecrated it when private altars were permitted. If you then offer up on a private altar after private altars are prohibited, the punishment is kares. Rava objects to this. Is it written, and about them you shall say? To them is written, right? To them, not about them. And we read it as to them. And the verse means that the command should be relayed to Aaron, his sons, and the Jewish people who are mentioned in the beginning of the passage. And additionally, it is taught in a Baraisa. Rabbi Shimon would say 4 principles with regard to sacrificial animals. With regard to offerings that one consecrated during a period of prohibited private altars and slaughtered and offered up outside their designated area during a period when private altars are prohibited. For these, one is in violation of a positive mitzvah and a prohibition, and they carry the punishment of kares. Right? This is the normal situation during the 369 years of Shiloh, during the 800 years of Jerusalem and forever afterward, that private altars are prohibited, and therefore, if you slaughter and offer up on a private altar, meaning outside the temple, you violated a positive mitzvah, a prohibition, and you're liable to kares. Okay? Standard situation. With regard to one who consecrated them during a period when private altars are permitted, and then he slaughtered and offered when they're prohibited, for these, one is in violation of a positive mitzvah and a prohibition, but they do not carry the punishment of kares. That's what we just learned a moment ago in the Mishnah. With regard to one who consecrated them during a period when private altars are prohibited, and then he slaughtered and offered them outside their designated area during a period of permitted private altars. Okay? For these, one is in violation of a positive mitzvah, but one has not violated a prohibition with regard to them, and therefore he would not be liable to kares. And with regard to one who consecrated them when private altars are permitted, and then he slaughtered and offered them when private altars are permitted, He is exempt from all violations. He hasn't done anything wrong. Now the Baraisa, this Baraisa, as compared to our Mishnah, states explicitly that there is no distinction between slaughtering and offering up on a private altar. In both cases, one who consecrated the offering during the period when private altars are permitted, and then he slaughtered or offered during a period when private altars are prohibited, he is exempt from karas. He violated a positive mitzvah and a prohibition, but no karas, because he consecrated the animal when private altars were permitted. Now, the Gemara concludes the refutation of the opinion of Rav Kahana, who distinguished between slaughter and offering up, is a conclusive refutation. Back to the Mishnah. We're moving on from distinguishing between private and permitted altars, offering up and sacrificing. We're going on to a different topic, all right? A different topic. We're talking about private altars, but now what we're talking about is elements of the sacrificial service that one must do in the Holy Temple. What if he did them outside? And these are the consecrated items and lists components of the sacrificial service that were performed only on a great public altar, i.e. the tabernacle, and not on a private altar. Meaning, okay, when private altars are permitted, okay, so you do not do certain elements of the sacrificial service that can only be done on the great public altar, i.e. at the tabernacle. When you can bring offerings on private altars, you don't do these aspects of the sacrificial service. Okay. And the Gemara clarifies the source of each ritual on the list. So the source for the law concerning semicha, placing hands on the head of an offering. We don't do that for an offering being brought on a private altar. That's only on the national altar. And this is as it is written, quote, if his offering be a burnt offering, he shall bring it to the entrance of the tent of meeting, national altar, that he may be accepted before the Lord, and he shall lay his hand upon the head of the burnt offering. We do that at the tent of meeting. We don't do that at private altars. The source for the law concerning slaughtering offerings of the most sacred order in the north of the courtyard. Obviously, you can only do that in the courtyard of the tabernacle. This is as it is written, and he shall slaughter it on the side of the altar northward before the Lord in Leviticus 1:11. The source for the law concerning placement of the blood of a burnt offering around, i.e. on all four sides of the altar, the national altar. This is how the sprinkling is done for these kinds of offerings on the four sides of the altar. This is not a requirement. This is not done on private altars. And this is as it is written in Leviticus 1:5, and Aaron's sons, the priests, shall sprinkle the blood round about against the altar that is at the entrance of the tent of meeting. The source for the law concerning waving of those offerings that require waving before the Lord, as it is written, and the priest shall take one of the limbs and offer it for a guilt offering and the lug of oil and wave them for a wave offering before the Lord in Leviticus 14:12. And the source for the law concerning bringing meal offerings to the corner of the altar before the removal of the handful from the meal offering, the comets that will then go into the altar fire. This is as it is written, and he shall bring it to the altar in Leviticus 2:8. So the definite article before the word altar indicates that this applies only to the altar in the tabernacle and not to a private altar. Next topic. With regard to the question of whether a meal offering was sacrificed upon an altar outside the temple, right? A mincha offering. This is a meal offering. With regard to the question of whether a meal offering was sacrificed upon an altar outside the temple, the Mishnah teaches that Rabbi Yehuda says there is no meal offering sacrificed on an altar outside the temple. Even a great public altar, for example, the tabernacle in Gilgal, Nov, and Givon, meaning that during a period when private altars are permitted, mincha offerings, meal offerings, are not brought even on the national altar, right? During this period, certain offerings just aren't brought. And we're going to wait until the national altar is fully established. Right? When private altars were permitted, the national altar was lacking, right? It was somehow lacking. During Nov and Givon, this was a period where the altar was in one place and the ark was in another. During the period in Gilgal, the nation was not yet at rest, right? And so certain offerings weren't brought. And so according to Rabbi Yehuda, during those periods, meal offerings weren't brought at all. Rav Sheshes says, according to the statement of the one who says, there is a meal offering sacrificed on an altar outside the temple. There are also burnt offerings sacrificed on an altar outside the temple. According to the statement of the one who says there is no meal offering sacrificed on an altar outside the temple, there are also no burnt offerings sacrificed on an altar outside the temple. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in now. Now, the reason for this is that the Torah is referring to offerings that were sacrificed during the period of the permitted, when private altars were permitted, and the Torah refers to them as slaughtered offerings. Zevachim, right? The title of this tractate. This refers to mammals that were shechted. Absent that, not fitting in that category are meal offerings, which are brought from wheat or barley, and bird offerings, which when they were brought in the temple were not shechted, right, were not slaughtered. Rather, they were killed through malika, the pinching of the nape of the neck. They were not zevachim. Slaughtered offerings, zevachim, in the verse, and sacrifice them for sacrifices of vezavechu zivche, peace offerings in Leviticus 17:5, from which it may be inferred, slaughtered offerings, right, shechted offerings, but not meal offerings. Shechted offerings, but not bird offerings, i.e. neither meal offerings nor bird offerings were sacrificed on an altar outside the temple, including a great public altar during these periods when private altars were permitted. Now the Gemara continues detailing the distinctions between great public altars and small private altars. And a priest is required only at a public altar, as it is written, and the priest shall sprinkle the blood against the altar of the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. Meaning on a private altar, the owner of the altar could bring the offering there. Maybe his firstborn son, but probably not. Men and women, priests not required for private altars. Priestly service vestments are required only at a public altar, as it is written, and they shall be upon Aaron and upon his sons when they go into the tent of meeting, or when they come near to the altar to minister in the sacred place. From Exodus 28:43. And with regard to service vessels, the consecrated vessels used to collect the blood from shechted offerings, that's only in the temple at the national altar. And with regard to service vessels, it is written, and they shall take all the service vessels wherewith they serve in the sacred place. Numbers 4:12. With regard to a pleasing aroma, i.e. that limbs that had previously been roasted off the altar should not be placed upon the altar. It is required only on a public altar, as it is written, and the priest shall sprinkle the blood against the altar of the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting, and the priest shall make the fat smoke for an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Leviticus 17:6. There are specific meanings. That phrase comes up, a pleasing aroma to the Lord, in several places in the Torah. The general meaning that Rashi ascribes to a pleasing aroma, I think the first time this term comes up, it's a pleasing aroma to God, not because he likes the smell of barbecue, but because he commanded that we do something and we did it. That's what makes the aroma pleasing to God. A partition, but that because it's repeated, we're going to learn different laws out from the various repetitions of the phrase, a pleasing aroma to the Lord, and that was just one of them. Now, a partition for the blood, i.e. the red line that divides the top from the bottom of the altar. Recall that the blood of a sin offering is sprinkled above the line, the blood of a burnt offering is sprinkled below, etc. But this only applies at the national public altar. A partition for the blood, i.e. the red line that divides the altar, as the blood of some offerings, for example, a sin offering was sprinkled above the line, the blood of other offerings, for example, a burnt offering was sprinkled below the line. This was required only on a public altar. As it is written, and the net may reach halfway up the altar. Exodus 27:5. The definite article before the word altar in this verse indicates that this applied only to the altar in the tabernacle. And with regard to the requirement for washing of hands and feet by the priests before the sacrificial service, it is required only on a public altar. As it is written, when they went into the tent of meeting and when they came near to the altar, they shall wash, in Exodus 40, verse 32. Again, these are laws that only apply to the priests who are serving in the temple or the tabernacle at the great national public altar. Okay, question from Shannon. Part of the story of Hanukkah deals with an altar in Modi'in and the Cohen Matisyahu of Maccabee fame. Where in the historical framework does this fit in vis-a-vis local altars? That's a great question. I don't know. By then, we're in the Second Temple period. A lot has gone wrong. I don't know if they were saying that this was another name, not for the modern Modi'in, but something else, or they were saying, or perhaps it's like that same explanation that we just had before in the story of Samson's parents, exigent circumstances, right? I mean, at that point, the national altar had been totally desecrated. They were hiding in the hills. They were at war with the Syrian Greeks, and sadly, the Jews who sided with those people, it might well be that was exigent circumstances. I'm not sure how. I'm not familiar enough with the story to give any better answer than that. Okay, so Charles. Abraham Ramirez Verdugo says, why did Eliyahu Hanavi, right, Elijah the prophet, sacrifice on Mount Carmel if at that time the first temple stood and one could only sacrifice in Jerusalem by a Cohen? The exact same question and a perfect question, right? And now we're talking first temple period. Again, here we're first temple period, but we also have a division of the kingdom, right? So the first temple is in Jerusalem, and then we had the civil war in the wake of after King Solomon died. His son Rehoboam was a horrible king. The northern kingdom splits off. We have wicked kings in the north. Ahab was one of them, one of the most wicked. Because of his wife Jezebel, who was bringing in all kinds of idolatrous prophets of the Baal and Asherah. And so, Elijah was a prophet of God trying to bring the Jews back into the fold and away from these horrible idolatrous practices. And so presumably this was a demonstration that he did. There's only one God. All these other prophets from, these other false gods are absolute phonies. And I'm going to prove that, right? And so, it was a sacrifice, right? But it was not a sin offering. It was not a guilt offering. It was not maybe you could call it a burnt offering. But what it really was a demonstration of God's power. And it was something that Elijah did. Some say he was very chutzpahdik and he kind of forced God's hand, but he had already been selected by God for his mission as a prophet. And so I would say this was definitely one of those exigent circumstances where we cannot learn out any laws from what Elijah did because it was an extreme situation. I don't know how to answer that any other way. That's in my opinion. I'd have to do further research, but it definitely, you're right, it was at Mount Carmel, and it was a time when there was a national altar in Jerusalem. I think it wasn't any kind of normal bringing of sacrifices. It was a very unique situation. And Lucy says in Judges 13, it does seem that Manoah and the angel were very comfortable about doing a burnt offering on a private altar. It looked like that was the normal way to proceed, and that's why it gets raised in this chapter, right? Again, we have the same type of problem, but in that situation, it's during Shiloh, right? So again, we were not supposed to be bringing offerings on private altars, and yet, as Lucy's saying, well, but it sort of like he didn't say, well, we're not really supposed to do this, but we just saw an angel of the Lord, so let's just bring a sacrifice. You didn't have that kind of internal debate. I don't know what else to say. I'm basing what I'm teaching on the principles we learned in this tractate. But they themselves are saying, no, the story of Samson's parents was exigent circumstances. And so, there weren't that many stories where people got a visitation from an angel. That was clearly a miraculous manifestation of an angel. They reacted by bringing an offering, and they were not punished for it. Quite the contrary, the offering was accepted. But we can't learn out laws from that for other, normal situations about bringing offerings in that period. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together tomorrow for our siyum on Tractate Zevachim. It's 120 pages long. It's been a relatively long tractate. A lot of challenging laws, a lot of really fascinating history, especially in this final chapter 14. And then we will move on to just open, as we always do when we make a siyum, just open the first few lines of the next tractate, Menachot or Menachos, which does continue the laws of offerings, focusing on meal offerings. But that tractate also includes a lot of very interesting digressions and ends in a very celebrated teaching that emerges from the pleasing aroma to God. Not only that we're commanded to bring an offering and we do it, that pleases God, but also the very democratic nature that God is pleased when we bring our best, whether it's a wealthy man's offering or a poor man's offering. If we offer our best to the Lord, he is equally pleased with that. We'll encounter that teaching in Menachos. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. With God's help, see you tomorrow, regular Monday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. All the best.